Yeah, I don't have my microphone. I got to stay right here. That's very hard. I just want to remind you of the end of the Gospel of Matthew, which, in about another year or two, we're going to get to. All right? So, in case you don't know this, little spoiler alert, the end of the Gospel of Matthew is the Great Commission. It is the call, it is the commissioning of the disciples. We read this in verse 18 of chapter 28. And Jesus came up and spoke to them, saying, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." So we get to the end of the Gospel of Matthew, and by the way, again, maybe spoiler alert, but I certainly hope not. If it is, actually, I want to talk to you, all right? Jesus dies, and Jesus rises from the grave. And Jesus is victorious, and he purchases salvation for all who would believe in him. And then he tells the disciples, you need to go tell the world about this. And this is what we're supposed to do. Churches, sometimes we spend a lot of time trying to come up with like pithy mission statements, and it's fine to try and be pithy and creative, but Jesus gave us the mission. It's right here. We didn't have to actually make it up. It's right there for us. And it's not just for Dawn or those who go overseas. We need to be globally minded because the message is for the whole globe. But you see, when they make disciples, they're supposed to teach them. And they're supposed to teach them to observe all that I've commanded you. You know what the most recent command that Jesus gave them is? To go make disciples. Which means that when you make a disciple, one of the things you need to teach that disciple is to go make more disciples. And if we're being properly discipled, we should understand this is a calling for all of us. And at the same time tonight, we acknowledge that for many of us, the call of the Great Commission means being faithful to making disciples right here. But for some, it does mean going, and it can mean going very far. And in Dawn's case, it's going to mean going south and east, I guess, of here. She's going to be going to Puebla. And so that's what she's going to be sharing with us about tonight. I won't take any more of her time. Just so that you know, Don will be giving a presentation and then taking questions. So if you've got questions, you may want to jot them down so that we don't throw her off track too much throughout her presentation. But there will be time for that. So keep in your mind the things that you may want to ask her.
Okay, I'm a person who walks, so I'm sorry. I just know this of myself. I'm a teacher's heart, and I do not sit still, even in the classroom. So I just well own it, right? Thanks, Jesse, by the way. That was a perfect lead into the little hashtag I've been putting on everything was making disciples of all nations, because that is exactly where that hashtag has come from, is that verse. I realize as the ministry I'm getting ready to step into is very much intentional as far as making disciples of all nations. And it actually has that advantage. Before I get too far, let me back this up and let me ask a question. How have you been challenged or encouraged lately? Or pushed to do something you haven't thought about doing yet? How has God done that to you guys? Teacher's heart, I just want to hear a few people. Nobody's been challenged to do anything? Go for it. Barbie. Yeah, cool. We're reaching out to Naco, Arizona. Yeah.
Speaking to my sister about the gospel, she maybe doesn't really know, and troubles me, so I actually told her I was concerned about if the end comes soon, she won't be living there. I don't want to know about her. She was very touched.
That's important stuff, yeah.
That was a challenge to me because I don't like to confront anybody.
I understand that, and I understand where you're going with that. Interesting little side note. Not an interesting little side note. It's actually last fall, teaching the kids Sunday school, Exodus actually came up. And it's interesting because, Jesse, you hit on the same idea last week and you didn't even know it. But last fall, I was teaching the kids Moses and about Moses and how Moses was confronted in the burning bush that, hey, he needs to go take the people out of Egypt, out of Israel. And here's Moses trembling, going, I can't do that. I don't have a voice. I can't speak. Sometimes I feel that way too. And when I read that and realized, but that's a lack of faith in God, because the next thing that God says was, who created your mouth? And at that question, I don't know about you, but I kind of go, I have no more excuses. We're done. Let me just step back and go, okay, God, what do you want me to do and where do you want me to go? And that really was similar to what Jesse was teaching last week in Bible study about Saul doing the same thing, only Saul had an opposite reaction when he's called. He hid behind everything. Therefore, let me give a little bit of my background and why this is actually not a far-fetched idea. I actually grew up in the farm fields of Iowa. Farm kid through and through. But my parents are also first and second generation. So they had a heart to make sure that even as kids, we understood the gospel full force. That we didn't take it for granted. My dad in particular grew up in a background that you're just good enough to go to heaven and that's the way it goes. He was one of the ones that was like, no. He learned as a teenager that wasn't the way we get to heaven. That wasn't the way Jesus had called us to learn, to live. So him and my mom actually made sure that they taught us the gospel from the time we were young. And that was actually how I got saved, was listening to them teach that and actually accepting that as my own personal savior. The other interesting little side part of this, my parents, farm kids, or farmers themselves, would travel. So we'd take road trips, and my mom knew how to make a road trip rather cheap. She'd find the free places to go and the parks and the museums, and you got to hang out with anybody in the RV parks because you get cheaper stays at an RV park. So we'd travel all kinds of places across the Midwest, actually even beyond the Midwest, clear over to the West. So travel had already kind of been instilled in my life, and I started kind of liking travel. As a junior high kid, somebody put a magazine in front of me one time and goes, here's an interesting magazine, and it had all the places around the world that you could go. All the places around the world that you could go. And I'm like, where do I want to go? Let's see. I want to go to Africa. I want to go to Asia. That sounds cool. Let's see the Great Wall of China, all these things. And actually, I had even started taking missions trips in high school instead of going these places. And in doing that, I kind of got a love and a passion for it. Interestingly enough, I never did make it to Asia or Africa or Europe. I kept landing in Mexico, of all places, which is an interesting thing. That's, I think, a God hand in all of this. Because I actually, first time I got to Mexico, I'm like, really? That's the country right next to us. Everybody should know about that country, right? It's not traveling very far. But actually, that is the country that God has already called my heart, and he was using those moments to go, you don't really know. And you don't really know everything there is to know about that country, even if it's next to us. So I kind of started liking that. College, I got an education degree, took it from a Bible college so I could study missions, by the way, so that I could even explore missions outside, getting into traveling again. And after my first teaching job, I actually landed a job in Puebla. Puebla, in particular, had keened my interest. I'd been there as a teenager on a short missions trip itself. And so I was like, sure, let's try this city. Let's see what God has there. And so I actually taught there I taught there for about 5 years. And before I get too far into describing Puebla and all that fun stuff, Mexico in particular, does anybody know anything about Mexico that they would like to share? Fun little notes? I know Pastor and his wife are like, we could tell the whole story.
It was the center of the Spanish-Chinese silver trade.
True?
Their items are cheap.
Items are cheap. That's very true. Oh, it has beautiful architecture, you're right. That's an interesting note that I didn't learn until I lived there. Yes, they don't speak all Spanish, although it is the official language. There are several other languages there. I think my first year teaching, I told the kids that, I think it was studying history, and I told the third graders and the fourth graders that sure, the Aztecs are, probably like married in, just assuming, not sure. And one little kid corrected me and goes, Miss Hall, my parents work with the Aztecs that still speak the Aztec language. I was like, I think I need to learn a little bit more about this country. Those little humbling moments as a teacher, and I kind of go, okay, this is the time for me to learn. It's another one that was learning to me was listening to the missionaries. You learn a lot. One of the missionaries was an IMB missionary when I was there, and he talked about one of his ministries was actually going into these towns that don't have a written language, and he would share the gospel in a storytelling format so they could pass it on to their kids and their grandkids. I said, well, that's neat. And he's the head of all of Latin America. And I said, well, that's neat. So where's most of your work? He goes, actually, ironically, from Mexico City to the southern border. He goes, that's where a lot of our work is actually at, because that's where a lot of our not translated or written down languages are. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I never would have thought. The city where I'm going to is Puebla, and it would be clear down south of Mexico City on a 2-hour bus ride. Some of the things that Puebla is known for is the volcanoes of Popo and Ixta, which is tied into the Aztec culture somehow. It's like a love story of Romeo and Juliet. And it's actually rather beautiful. The city itself as a city has been reporting 3 to 5 million. The state itself is actually growing the whole thing. I recently was there about 2 weeks ago, was just asking some of the locals about the city because I noticed it was not the size that I remember even 8 years ago when I was there. And the numbers of 3 to 5 million I had always heard of even about 20 years ago, and I'm like, that's not quite. The official city is 3 to 5 million. However, the city has grown to almost the entire state, and we're looking at probably about closer to 6 million in the state even. So it's growing. They even picked up in the last 8 years an extra factory that's producing automobiles, so there's more people coming into town. Quite growing city. It's also right next to Mexico City, which is your huge metropolis of 20 to 26 million people. So yeah, it's feeding off of quite a bit. Locally, Puebla is rich in culture, lots of native, lots of places, beautiful architecture. By the way, fun little fact, that's actually a pyramid underneath a Catholic church, one of the largest ones in the world, pyramid-wise. And the Catholic church is right on top of it. Beautiful view when you can stand up there and look across the city, and that's actually how I got that view, which is looking across, not to Popo and Ixta, but clear across the city. That city stretches clear up to about to the mountains in the view of that picture. After about 5 years, I had taught in that city. I left Puebla teaching. I left Puebla for the purpose of coming back to the States and kind of seeing and learning more about the private schools here in the States and kind of what's going on here in Christian school education. It was a good chance for me to do that. And recently, in the last year, here's where the not so far-fetched ideas are coming. In the last year and a half, the Lord had led me to actually study educational administration with the possibility of becoming a principal. And in the tail end of studying, Puebla itself, actually, Puebla Christian School, this is the school, has actually put out a plea for a need for a principal, and so they had actually contacted me and asked me if I would come, and I was like, sure, why not? The school itself, so I get a little more central, it's central in the middle of the city. It's not uncommon to hear of missionaries, and I will give you that. It is a missionary school, originally built in 1976 They were intentional in the way they built that because before 1976, if you were a missionary in the city of Puebla, oftentimes you sent your kids off to boarding school. And oftentimes that boarding school was in Guatemala. Or you homeschooled them. So that was kind of the only options for a lot of the missionary families. So in the 60s, they looked and goes, can we see if we can pull this together? Because there was enough of them starting to compile in the same general area, but they're not overlapping. A lot of with a city of 3 to 5 million and even growing, a lot of those missionaries have ministries that are not necessarily overlapping, but they can work together, if that makes sense. It's not uncommon to hear of a kid who drives 45 minutes to get into town to go to school, just to that school in particular, because the city is so large. So in the 60s, they had built this school, started out as a school for just the missionary kids. As the school started growing, in the 90s, they looked around and goes, you know what, there's a lot of international kids in this area too. Why not let them study just as well? And what they found was international kids can actually take their studies at an American school and almost transfer just about anywhere. For example, some of the Koreans that would come through the school would actually be able to, first of all, a lot of times they would want to go to a college in the States, but if they couldn't go to a college in the States, their credits from high school, from that school, would still transfer even to a Korean college in Korea. So it was kind of cool that they still had that access and ability. And what they found too, on the side note, was there was a chance and an opportunity to disciple kids that could go literally all over the world. We would end up with kids in that school. I had Brazilians at one point in time, I had Koreans, we had Mexicans, of course, and I think there was about 2 or 3 other nationalities, and off the top of my head, they're not running through my head. Oh, Canadians. Canadians, Brazilians, and Israelis. We've had Israelis before. The school currently is reporting numbers of about 40 students from grades 1st through 12th grade. And they had been at one point in time up to almost 60 kids, so they have seen larger numbers at one point in time or another. In the last couple of years, with COVID and a few other extenuating circumstances that they cannot control, they've seen smaller numbers in the last couple of years. All right, a little history, and I'll show you where I'm at. This is the picture on the left. Was the last class I had, so this is a fun little side note. The last class I had as 3rd and 4th graders, because that's what I used to teach. Most of my 3rd graders are on the bottom, and 4th graders are all kind of piled around on top of me. Most of those kids were missionary kids. A few of them were Mexican kids, and some Canadian kids in there as well. So the first kid in particular is a fun one. This boy, his name is Aaron, and Aaron, his mom, actually is one of the secretaries of the school. His family's rather tied to the school for a couple of good reasons. They have actually become a support for this family. Aaron has seen, or is seeing, heaven right now, and he's enjoying heaven right now. But his family still teaches at the school, and his mom is actually, I already said this, I need to slow down. His mom is the secretary. His nephew is getting ready to enter 1st grade in this school. So it's kind of a fun little story. This girl is actually a senior this year. So she was all excited when I showed up about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she goes, "Really? You're back?" I was like, "Yes." She goes, "But you had to wait until after I leave." And I'm sorry, I can't make that happen any sooner. Sorry, hun. So she's actually a senior. She's graduating this year. She's actually going to study ballerina because she really likes to do ballet. And her mom was ecstatic to see me. She goes, "You're the favorite, my favorite." And if you followed me on Facebook, you might have seen that picture actually post. She was super ecstatic that I was back in town. This boy is actually, and I'll show you the next picture. This boy. third grader turned into a junior, so I will see him again next year. And I surprised him sitting in one of his first classes as he was like, "Oh, hey, Miss Hall." Like, "Oh yeah, I remember you." Try to be the cool kid still, though. His family has actually been tied to the school for a while. He actually even has parents who have been to the school and been through the school. They are missionaries on one side of the city, and they do a lot of work in a church in particular. So he's doing a lot of church planting work. This girl is a daughter of another missionary family, and her family is actually rather grateful for the school for a couple of reasons. Her mom actually has a genetic disorder where she's kind of she's slowing down a lot faster than she realized. And they're grateful for the school because that gives them a place to do education and not worry about trying to do homeschool or anything like that to get it taken care of, and mom can worry about medical treatment. But at the same token, they have a passion for Mexico. They're constantly doing some form of discipleship or teaching classes right within Mexico. The school in the last couple months, recently got connected with Teach Beyond. Teach Beyond in particular, let me pull you the bigger picture with them. Teach Beyond in particular used to be called Jantz Ministries, is what I found out. But Jantz Ministries, about 10, 20 years ago, used to do crusades, like Billy Graham crusades. And those weren't flying as well because culture changes, even around the world. And they started realizing they got really good with, and if you've ever heard the term Black Forest Academy, they realized they got really good with Black Forest Academy, and that was also a missionary school. They also take in the international kids. They realized they got really good with that one school, and they started looking to see if they could expand this and kind of interlock schools together. And so they reached out to Puebla Christian School, and Puebla Christian School reached back and said, "Yeah, we could use your help." They have actually become a part of Teach Beyond. And then as I'm looking for an agency, first place I looked was, "What are your suggestions?" "Oh, we're part of Teach Beyond now, why don't you try them?" And it's actually been a very good partnership in a lot of ways because they are connecting other schools with similar histories to be able to encourage each other. Principals can relate to each other. Hey, in Latin America, for example, I've heard of a couple of other principals going, "Oh yeah, we're struggling with this. How would you do with it in your culture? Hey, there's some similar stories. We can work together on some of these things." Their vision, in particular, is to wholeheartedly serve the Father's world, to love Jesus Christ, and to see individuals and communities transformed by His Spirit through education. They're really looking for that transformational side of ministry because they see these schools as a chance to not only teach kids, but when you teach kids, you can actually disciple these kids as well, and they can go all over the world. That whole making disciples and sending them across the nations can even happen within these little schools. It transforms societies. So their mission to go with that is all followers of Jesus. We are a global community providing transformational education to children and adults. We provide teaching, learning services in order to see individuals, communities, all become God intends them to be, promoting holistic, personal growth and enduring social benefits. And therefore, here's where I come to my request. I'm actually looking for partnership. Partnership with me means you get to hear more as I'm on the field and how things are going, and we get to work together in a way. I get to share with you what's going on, you get to share with me what's going on, and you get to hear how God is using even my ministry as a principal in Puebla Christian School and how it's growing as far as how are the students and how is that ministry growing. So I am looking for partners. So please do pray about whether you would be willing to do partnership as in financial or prayer or encouragers. I'll take questions. Before I do too far, any questions so far? Because I do feel like I rattled quite a bit. Yeah.
What do you expect the annual cost to be for you on the field? That's one. And second, where are the raising?
So, broken down my salary, not salary, I should be clear on that because technically when I'm raising support for both taxes in the country and out of the country, so it would be looking like a self-support situation. I don't see every dime that comes through, if that makes sense, on my end, just because it's benefits that I also have to take care of too. Health insurance, US government does kind of require certain things that I have to have. My goal is actually, and I'm just gonna put this up there, it'll be easier. I totally need $2,249 per month, not per year, per month. And that would cover both a salary for me to live off of, my housing needs, and any other visas or flights or moving expenses that I will run into in living in Mexico. Does that make more sense? And on top of that, I need all of it raised by July. That's my goal. Yeah.
Sorry, I can't read it. What's the red and purple?
Oh, my current support is 30% right now, and the purple is what I need. So I have about 30% of that monthly support already raised. Moving expenses, I have about $3,500-ish already raised for moving expenses right now. It is kind of very fine print up there. Yeah. Go for it, Berta.
Much in Spanish, or is that necessary?
We tell the teachers it's not so necessary. However, as the principal, it's probably more necessary. And yes, I did learn my Spanish when I was there. And going back, I was going, oh yeah, I remember all this. I will still try and practice, though, with people around here that I hear in Spanish as best as I can to keep going with it. Yeah.
So how does the support work with people that support you monthly? Do you send money to you directly, or does it go through an organization?
Thank you for that question. Actually goes, in order to support me, I would actually prefer it to go through Teach Beyond, because they are actually keeping track of my financial side of things. On my ministry side of things, they can also write the tax, that word just left my head. The what? Tax receipt, yeah, that you may need if you need to claim it on your taxes and whatnot. And it's also helpful for them too, because they can help me budget it too, to keep things going. Yeah.
Of what you receive, what percentage goes to that organization?
12%.
12%?
Yep. That's for administrative fees specifically. So like bookkeeping, they have a person or whatever that might help me with so it covers off like computer programs and stuff like that they're helping to help me create things. For example, I have prayer cards and they helped me create those. I, yes, purchased them out of my account. However, they did have somebody that helped me design it and make sure it looked good, so that it kind of matched cohesively. Mark.
What's the partnership? How does that work?
So partnership works simple. I actually need financial and prayer partners. If you commit to praying or to financial partnership, you would fill out some information to let me know. And then I would send you updated emails, keep in contact with you, let you know, hey, this is what's going on in the field. I do have a tendency to write, probably trying to decide whether I want to do monthly or bi-monthly, because I used to do bi-monthly, and that might be a little bit much on me. So I probably write monthly letter or bi-monthly letters back home, but I also will communicate through email and other questions back and forth as well.
So is there like a set financial goal?
Yeah, I do need to get to $2,249 per month. So like a person who would want to donate, say, $50 per month or whatever, that would help me knock off some of that and add to my financial support. Does that make more sense? I do have a few, yes. Yep, there are some coming from this church. My history as a missionary in that school has also picked up a few former ministry partners that used to help with me years ago in Iowa as well. So they're starting.
One more question. How difficult is it to teach in a multilingual class? How do you accomplish that?
So their base language it's an American-based school, and I'm glad you asked. It's an American-based school. That means they use an American-based curriculum. And in order for the kids to come to the class or come to the school, they have to test in with their English skills. So they do actually have to know some English level of skills in order to be in the classroom. If not, we've been known to work with them in any way capacity. I've been known to even tutor a 3-year-old who was trying to prepare to be a first grader in the school a couple years later. No. Other than I know the word Mexico is actually an Aztec word. I learned that one when I was there. They don't say it like Mexico, but I don't remember exactly how they say it. I do know that. It is Mexico if you're in Spanish, yes. The Aztecs will add an extra sound or something to it. I'm not sure exactly what it was. I don't remember exactly how they say it. Like they would say, we speak Mexicano or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it is.
Now, this is probably away from what you're talking about, but I'm just trying to picture these places that do not have a written language, and how do they pass things on? Like the
So,
American Indian story?
yeah, so the cities are a lot of, because they have the education, it's a lot of Spanish because they can make that very nationalized. Mexico in particular was not settled the way the US was. So a lot of your native Indians and stuff like that are up in the mountains and they're still practicing full-on tribal information and stuff like that. And they're still teaching that way. They just happen to be living within the culture of Mexico as well. I often, in the last couple of years, the PCS crew has started taking teams up into some of those mountainous areas to serve. Kind of a way to start teaching those kids about missions and being willing to serve around the world, even in their local area. And they'll take them up into the mountains. And I'd heard of several missionaries would often talk about picking up a translator, and what they mean is a kid that speaks Spanish but happens to know the neighboring town's language and can bring them up into that area just so they can have an extra translator to get from the native Indian language to Spanish to whatever else they need. Yeah.
Have you found a place where you're going to live, or are you still searching?
Working on that. I have checked out a couple places, but nothing quite panned out just yet, but that's okay. I've got time for that one. Yeah.
How long of a commitment did you have to make when you took the position?
Do I have to make? They would prefer a full year, so that's definite. I'm looking at this. They kind of do need somebody that would be more willing to do something a little more long term. They've had principals in the past 2 and 3 years, which are good. None of them are bad by any means, but they are looking for somebody that might be willing to be a little more long term if they can. Yeah. It's so cartel is not too big of a problem down there. Best way to say this, Puebla being the size of the city it is, you just need to know city basics and you're fine. The dangerous, as far as how dangerous it is, it's not super dangerous. rumor has it, I don't know how actual truth it is, that all the bosses are down there, so they don't really want to mess up their own city. I don't know how true that is, but but it is kind of fun to take note of. Puebla doesn't seem to have a problem as much of the drug cartel issue. Yeah. Catholicism is a big one down there. In that area, Catholicism, and I would say more like old style Catholicism, I know this area kind of has a little bit of it here, but the way I have often described it, the states, the Catholicism in, say, the North America that came over after Martin Luther. Catholicism that came into Mexico was before Martin Luther, so it kind of has an influence of the old style of Catholicism, hence the reason you have the Basilica, where they're trying to pay penance to go up to some of those places, any of that kind of worship and stuff like that. Or don't touch the Bible because it's holy. Well, yes and no, but yeah.
I just want to let you know, Don, how much we love and appreciate you. And as your sending church, we will always be praying for you. And really want to encourage people to partner with Don. We had opportunities in our life to also raise our own support, and it's definitely a step of faith. God is good. He always provides for our needs wherever we are. The wonderful thing about being able to partner with someone like you is we already have a personal relationship with you. We want to support missionaries all through IMB and in the North American Mission Board. But be able to have a personal relationship with a missionary on the field like you're going to be is an opportunity that God is giving us right now. And whenever we partner with missionaries, He's using us to do His work in places we may not be able to go. But as we support you financially and with our prayers, God's using us for His purposes, for His greater purposes. And I'm so excited because I know as a member of the missions team, our missions team right here in the church, we have a huge vision. And Eric is the head of that, and we are just excited that you're going and that we want to become more mission-minded. And this is just a first step, I think, for us to be able to really just reach out and be active in God's work a long way from where we live.
And I will caveat that. You know how people move and they don't always keep in contact? One thing I've been saying since I have signed up to do this was, even though I'm moving, it doesn't mean I don't get to keep in contact. I actually get to come back and visit and check in on you and see what's going on and see what's going on in your lives too. That's the one advantage of doing it this way.
Is this, then you can network, you go through the network, you go through like Facebook or what's the Teach World?
Teach Beyond. So Teach Beyond is the official organization that I'm working underneath. And what? They have their own website. Yep. I have my own website because I like to simplify life. And so I did put up my own website. If you're curious to follow me, I've got information about that. But I also will send emails out. There was a question in that, and there was a thought in my head. Hold on. Nope, it just left. Oh, Facebook, thank you. I do have Facebook. My personal page, you can follow me there, but I also have a public page I'm working on building as well that you can kind of follow me there if you'd rather.
You have those listed, like what's up in your apartment?
Yep. Donna. They do and they don't. That's one of the things I'd like to help update. Their curriculum they do have, and they have been using it for a while. It's a mixed, so they have some things from Abeka, they have some things from Houghton Mifflin at one point in time, they have some things from Addison Wesley, I think. They have a couple varied things as far as curriculum goes. And they're working with what they've got. And so that's a good thing, that they're willing to work with what they've got. Any others? I should say, by the way, update is in help them get better books or newer books. They are using some of the older stuff just to keep going. Like on a daily basis in the school. With elementary kids, they kind of go to their own classrooms first thing in the morning at 8 o'clock. And they're in self-contained classrooms. Elementary in particular right now is divided into 2 teachers. So there is a teacher for 1st and 3rd grade. They don't have second graders right now. But next year that's going to change. And then they have a teacher for 3rd, 4th, and 5th as of right now. And then the older kids do swap out, but they are grouped by grades, by 2 grades. So 5th and, let me say this correctly, 7th and 8th rotate together, 9th and 10th will rotate together, and then juniors and seniors will rotate together in classes. So the church will do their own donation, and you can chime in that way too. Helpful to me is if you do it through Teach Beyond. It's a long term, and I know exactly who to make sure I get the thank you card to. Yeah.
Transportation situation.
Transportation is wonderful in Mexico. Just as a side note, you can get around just about anywhere on either a combi or bus or taxi or an Uber or another company that's called a Didi that's like an Uber. So there's quite a few ways to get around town, and you can drive, which I'm looking at the possibility of maybe having a car. I'm not sure. Jeffrey.
I noticed you mentioned a few teachers, but how big is the school staff, including yourself?
There is, off the top of my head, about maybe 8 or 9 teachers in general. They've got 3 coming on in the fall as far as full-time teachers, and right now they are filled in with a lot of part-times right now. They did a lot of patchwork to get this year going for them.
Has COVID been a real problem for that school?
So that's an interesting question. Mexico in general was shut down as far as schools go all year last year. And this year is the first year back in person instruction. And it's not been too much of a problem as far as COVID cases going around the school. They have had a few incidents and needs to shut down the school for a day or 2. But it hasn't been a huge issue. They're just being extra cautious, and I totally get that. And they're actually grateful that they're in person. I think so too.
So what I want to do, can I take that from you? What I want to do is close our time in prayer for Dawn. I think it's a really neat opportunity when you think about these kids that go through the school that are going to be getting Bible classes and hearing the gospel. A lot of them coming up in missionary homes, but then they're going to go all over the place. And so it's an opportunity to influence children and to disciple children who knows where God's going to take them, back to Israel, back to Brazil, to the U.S., to Korea. So what a neat opportunity, Dawn. Do come and get one of these cards from Dawn so that you can put her on your refrigerator and know how to support her in the event that you're feeling led to do that. And our missions committee is looking at, they've not quite figured out exactly the support, how we're going to be doing that, but they will be supporting Don through the church as well. We do have I wanted to do this, we had a couple minutes. I'd like to ask, who do I want to ask? Who else is on the, Barbie, you're on the missions committee. Would you start us just in prayer? And we'll just take a couple minutes. Anybody who feels led, if you would just pray out loud for Don, and then I'll close us in a couple minutes.